The wedding day. It was a beautiful, sunny morning, the kind of day that seemed made for celebrations. Marcus stood in front of a large mirror, adjusting his tie nervously. Today was his wedding day, and he was about to marry Claire, a woman who had brought excitement and joy into his life after many years of loneliness. He smiled at his reflection, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. Everything seemed perfect. However, across the room, his son Ethan sat quietly on a chair, his face clouded with worry. While everyone around them was buzzing with excitement, Ethan felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. He didn't trust Claire. There was something about her that just didn't feel right. He had tried to talk to his father about it before, but Marcus was too in love to see any flaws. Ethan sighed deeply, knowing he had to do something before it was too late. The guests were arriving, filling the hall with laughter and happy chatter. Marcus' friends and family gathered to witness the big day, all of them pleased to see Marcus finally finding happiness again. Claire had quickly won over most of the family with her charm and beauty, and even the most skeptical relatives seemed to be taken by her. But Ethan could see through her act. He had been watching Claire closely over the past few months, and he had found something disturbing. As the wedding planner came into the room, signaling that it was time for the ceremony to begin, Ethan felt his heart race. His palms were sweaty, and his mind was spinning with thoughts of how to stop this disaster. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't let his father go through with it. He had to find a way to stop the wedding without completely ruining everything. The music began to play softly, signaling the start of the ceremony. Marcus took a deep breath and smiled, feeling a wave of excitement. This was the beginning of a new chapter in his life, and he was ready to embrace it. He walked out of the room with confidence, heading toward the altar where he would soon marry the woman he thought was the love of his life. Meanwhile, Claire was in her own room, getting ready. She looked stunning in her wedding dress, her smile lighting up the room as her bridesmaids fussed over her. But behind that smile, there was something else, something darker. She glanced at her phone, checking a message that made her frown for just a split second before she returned to her cheerful expression. Claire knew she had to keep her true intentions hidden just a little longer. If all went well today, she would be in control of everything she had planned. Back in the hall, Ethan stood near the entrance, watching as the guests took their seats. He spotted his best friend, Sarah, who had been the only person he confided in about his suspicions. She gave him a concerned look, mouthing, "Are you okay?" Ethan shook his head, his chest tightening with anxiety. Sarah had told him not to keep quiet, but Ethan still wasn't sure what to do. He didn't have all the proof he needed, just a gut feeling and some unsettling details he had found out about Claire's past. The officiant stood at the front of the room, and the music swelled as Marcus took his place at the altar. All eyes turned to the back of the hall, waiting for Claire to make her grand entrance. Ethan could barely breathe as the moment grew closer. He looked at his father, who was smiling so brightly, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Finally, the doors opened, and Claire stepped into the room, looking every bit the perfect bride. Gasps of admiration came from the guests as she walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on Marcus. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched her approach. He knew this was his last chance to say something before it was too late. But the words stuck in his throat, and he couldn't bring himself to speak. As Claire reached the front of the room and stood beside Marcus, the officiant smiled and began the ceremony. Ethan felt like the walls were closing in around him. He glanced at Sarah again, who gave him an encouraging nod. His father's happiness was on the line, but so was their future. When the officiant asked the traditional question, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace," Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to the couple at the altar. Ethan knew this was his moment. The entire room was waiting, and time seemed to slow down. He had the power to stop the wedding right then and there, but he had to choose his next move carefully. His hand shook as he considered what to do. The truth was ready to spill from his lips. But fear held him back. With everyone holding their breath, Ethan stood frozen in place. Would he reveal Claire's secret and stop the wedding, or would he let his father walk into a dangerous future? The decision was his to make, and the weight of it pressed heavily on his shoulders as the wedding day unfolded in front of him. The uneasy silence. As the silence stretched out, the tension in the room thickened. Everyone was waiting for someone to speak, but no one moved. Marcus glanced around, confusion flickering across his face, but then he smiled warmly at Claire, taking her hand. He was ready to continue, ready to marry the woman he believed would complete his life. But Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't let this happen. Ethan's legs felt like they were made of lead, but he knew he had to act. His father's happiness was important, but what about the truth? What about the terrible secret Claire was hiding? His mind raced back to the moment he had discovered it. Claire had been careful, but not careful enough. A few weeks ago, Ethan had been using her computer to look up something harmless for school. That's when he had seen the strange email. At first, it looked like spam, but something about it caught his attention. He read the message over and over, piecing together the truth. Claire wasn't who she claimed to be. Ethan hadn't said anything right away because he couldn't believe it. He wanted to be wrong. But after digging deeper, he realized the danger his father was in. Claire had a secret past, one that involved debts, scams, and even a criminal record. She had been hiding it all, wrapping herself in a perfect image to fool Marcus and almost everyone else. "Speak now or forever hold your peace," the officiant repeated, this time with a gentle urgency. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of the decision crashing down on him. His father deserved to know the truth, but how could he ruin everything in front of so many people? The happy faces of family and friends stared at the couple, unaware of the storm raging inside Ethan. Sarah, sitting in the front row, gave Ethan another worried glance. She knew he was struggling with the decision. Over the past few weeks, she had listened to Ethan as he tried to make sense of what he had discovered. She had urged him to tell his father before the wedding, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to do it. Now he was out of time. The officiant cleared his throat and continued, sensing no objections. "All right, let us proceed." "No." Ethan's voice broke through the silence, surprising even himself. The single word echoed through the room, and all eyes turned toward him. His legs felt shaky as he stepped forward, his palms sweaty and heart-pounding. Marcus looked at him, confusion and concern flooding his face. "Ethan?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but tinged with worry. Ethan could see the shock in his father's eyes. He had never been one to make a scene or cause trouble, but this moment was too important to stay silent. Ethan's gaze shifted from Marcus to Claire, whose eyes were now wide with surprise. And something else. Panic. For a brief moment, Claire's perfect mask slipped, revealing the fear underneath. "I can't let you do this, Dad," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "There's something you need to know." The guests whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what was happening. Ethan's legs felt weak, but he pressed on. "Claire isn't who she says she is." The room fell into a stunned silence again. Marcus' brows furrowed as he looked from Ethan to Claire, searching for answers. Claire's smile had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He took a step toward his son, his hands shaking slightly. Ethan could see the confusion in his father's eyes. The same confusion Ethan had felt when he first learned the truth. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "She's been lying to you, Dad. I've seen things. Emails, records. Claire has a criminal past, and she's hiding it from you." Marcus stood frozen, his expression unreadable. The guests were now sitting on the edge of their seats, eyes wide as they watched the drama unfold. Claire's face had turned pale, her eyes narrowing as she glared at Ethan. The mask she had worn for so long was slipping, and Ethan could see the anger rising within her. "That's ridiculous." Claire snapped, her voice sharp. She turned to Marcus, her expression softening into one of pleading. He's just upset. He doesn't want to see you happy. He's making things up, Marcus. Marcus looked between his son and his fiancée, his heart torn. He loved Claire, but he had always trusted Ethan. Now he didn't know who to believe. Ethan, he said, his voice cracking. Are you sure about this? Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. I didn't want to say anything, but I couldn't let you marry her without knowing the truth. Claire's eyes flashed with fury. She stepped forward, reaching for Marcus's hand, but Marcus pulled away slightly, his trust in her shaken. This is absurd, Claire said through gritted teeth. I've done nothing but love you and try to be a good stepmother to Ethan, and this is how he repays me. With lies. Marcus remained silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. He was struggling to process everything, his world spinning out of control. The guests sat in awkward silence, unsure of what to do. This was supposed to be a happy occasion, but now it felt like everything was crumbling around them. Ethan could see the hurt in his father's eyes, and it nearly broke him. But he knew he had done the right thing. Claire wasn't the person she pretended to be, and he had to save his father from making the biggest mistake of his life. The silence in the room was deafening as Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely audible. We need to talk, Claire. Claire's face hardened, and for the first time, the kind, loving woman she had pretended to be disappeared completely. Ethan could see the cold calculation in her eyes, and he knew that everything was about to change. The unraveling truth. The room stood frozen in time, the guests caught in a tense silence, unsure of what to expect next. Marcus and Claire stood at the altar, an invisible wall of doubt now separating them. Ethan had done what he never wanted to. He had shattered his father's perfect day. But deep down, he knew the truth had to come out, no matter how painful. Marcus' hand trembled as he turned to Claire, his face a mixture of confusion, heartbreak, and frustration. Is what Ethan said true? His voice wavered, as if he feared the answer. Claire, who had always been so calm and composed, now looked cornered. Her smile had vanished, replaced by an icy expression that sent a chill through the room. She let out a short, bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. You're really going to listen to him? He's just a kid, Marcus. He's upset because he thinks I'm taking you away from him. Ethan's heart raced, but he stood his ground. He could see the cracks forming in Claire's perfect image. She was no longer the kind, caring woman she pretended to be. The real Claire, the one she had kept hidden, was starting to emerge. Sarah, still sitting in the front row, felt the weight of the moment too. She glanced at Ethan, silently supporting him, knowing that his courage had forced this confrontation. Ethan gave her a brief look of thanks, but his focus remained on his father and Claire. Marcus frowned deeply, his mind racing. He turned to Ethan, a plea in his eyes. Ethan, are you absolutely sure about this? You're saying Claire has been lying to me this whole time? Ethan nodded. I'm sure, Dad. I didn't want to believe it either, but I found proof. His voice was steady now, the fear of speaking up gone. He had to protect his father, no matter the cost. The guests, sensing the tension rising, began to whisper among themselves. This was no longer just a family disagreement. This was a full-blown scandal unraveling before their eyes. Claire's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Ethan with something close to hatred. You've been snooping through my things, haven't you? She spat, her voice venomous. How dare you? Marcus, now completely unsure of what to believe, took a step back from Claire. His eyes were filled with hurt and suspicion. What's going on, Claire? Tell me the truth. I need to know. For a moment, Claire looked like she might deny it all again, but something shifted in her expression. She straightened her shoulders and crossed her arms, her voice cold and detached. Fine. You want the truth. I'll give you the truth. The guests gasped, and Marcus visibly recoiled, as if bracing for the worst. Yes, I have a past, Claire said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But it's nothing like what Ethan is making it out to be. Yes, I had some financial troubles years ago, but I've moved on. I've changed. I'm not the same person I used to be." Ethan shook his head, his frustration boiling over. "It's more than just financial troubles, Claire. You were involved in scams. You've hurt people, and you're still hiding things from my dad. This isn't just about money. It's about who you really are." Claire's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned to Marcus, her voice softer now, trying to regain control of the situation. "Marcus, you know me. I've been nothing but good to you. I've made mistakes, sure, but that's all in the past. We can still be happy." Marcus looked torn, his heart breaking under the weight of the revelation. He glanced at Ethan, then back at Claire, his mind racing. He had trusted Claire, believed in her, but now everything felt like a lie. The life he had envisioned with her was unraveling before his eyes. "I need to see the proof," Marcus finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "Ethan, if you have something, show me." Ethan nodded and pulled out his phone. He had saved screenshots of the emails and records he had found, ready for this moment. As he handed the phone to his father, the room held its breath. The guests watched in stunned silence, captivated by the drama unfolding in front of them. Marcus scrolled through the evidence, his face growing more and more pale with each passing second. His hand shook as the truth sank in. He had been deceived. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he was about to marry, had been hiding a dark side all along. Claire's eyes flickered with nervousness, watching Marcus as he absorbed the evidence. "Marcus, it's not what it looks like." She started, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "I trusted you," Marcus whispered, his voice broken. "I believed in you. But this—" The room was deathly quiet as Marcus lowered the phone, his eyes brimming with hurt. "I can't do this, Claire. I can't marry someone who's been lying to me." Claire's face twisted in anger and in desperation. "Marcus, please, it's not like that. I was going to tell you, I swear." But Marcus shook his head. "It's too late," he said, his voice barely audible. He turned to Ethan, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you, son. I don't know what I would have done without you." Ethan felt a surge of relief wash over him, but it was bittersweet. His father was heartbroken, and though he had done the right thing, it hadn't come without a cost. The aftermath. The tension in the room was suffocating, the once joyous atmosphere of the wedding now replaced by a storm of emotions. Claire stood frozen, her face pale, trying to process the sudden collapse of her carefully crafted plan. Guests sat in awkward silence, unsure of whether they should leave or stay, but unable to tear themselves away from the unfolding drama. Marcus' world felt like it was crumbling around him. He had been moments away from saying, "I do" to the woman he believed was his future, but now that future seemed like an illusion. His trust in her had been shattered, and the pain of betrayal was sharp, cutting deep. As Marcus looked at Claire, he couldn't find the words to express his devastation. Every memory they had built together felt tainted, each smile and shared moment now called into question. Claire had deceived him, and the weight of her lies was unbearable. Ethan stood beside his father, silent but firm. He had revealed the truth, but watching his father's heart break wasn't easy. He knew it had to be done, but the guilt still gnawed at him. Claire had been a big part of their lives, and despite everything, he hadn't wanted to see his father hurt like this. Claire, after a moment of stunned silence, finally spoke, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "Marcus, please. You don't understand. I had no choice. The things in my past, they don't define who I am now. I've changed." But Marcus, still holding Ethan's phone in his hand, could only shake his head. "No, Claire, you didn't give me a choice. You lied to me, hid things from me. If you had been honest from the start, maybe we could have worked through this. But now—" His voice trailed off, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Claire took a step forward, reaching for him, but he took a step back, his eyes filled with sorrow. I can't marry someone I can't trust. Claire's expression hardened, her vulnerability shifting to anger. You're really going to throw everything away because of one mistake? You think you're perfect, Marcus. You think your life has been without any secrets. Marcus blinked, taken aback by her sudden shift. The woman standing before him was no longer pleading for forgiveness, but instead lashing out in frustration. It's not about perfection, Claire. It's about honesty. It's about trust. I can't marry you if I don't know who you really are. Ethan watched the exchange, feeling a mix of relief and dread. He had exposed Claire's lies, but this was only the beginning. His father was wounded, and the fallout from today's events would be long-lasting. He felt a surge of protective instinct, knowing that he had done the right thing, but he also knew that things would never be the same. In the midst of the tension, one of the guests, an older family friend, stood up and cautiously approached Marcus. Marcus, maybe we should give this some time. You don't have to make any decisions right now. This is a lot to take in. Marcus nodded, his face pale and his emotions in turmoil. I know. I can't be here right now. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked down the aisle, leaving Claire standing alone at the altar. The guests watched in stunned silence as the groom walked away from his own wedding, his back straight, but his heart clearly shattered. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to follow, but then quickly ran after his father, leaving Claire standing in front of everyone, her anger now fully visible. Claire's gaze swept the room, her lips curled in frustration. Well, I guess the show's over, she spat bitterly, turning and storming out of the venue. The guests exchanged awkward glances, some murmuring to one another in confusion, unsure of what to do next. Ethan caught up to his father just outside the venue. Marcus was standing by a fountain, staring blankly at the water, his face a mask of grief. Ethan stood next to him, unsure of what to say. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken pain and regret. Dad, Ethan finally said, his voice soft. I'm so sorry. Marcus shook his head slowly. Don't be, son. You did the right thing. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to hurt you, Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. But I couldn't let you marry her, not after what I found out. Marcus sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping under the weight of everything that had happened. I know. I'm glad you told me, even if it hurts like hell. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of water from the fountain and the faint murmur of distant conversations were the only sounds that filled the space between them. Marcus wiped a hand over his face, trying to push away the feelings of betrayal and sorrow. We'll get through this, Marcus finally said, though his voice lacked conviction. It's just going to take some time. Ethan nodded, standing beside his father in quiet solidarity. There was no quick fix for what had happened, but at least they had each other. In the end, that was what mattered most. Unraveling the secret. The days following the disastrous wedding were a blur for Marcus. He spent hours sitting in silence, reflecting on how everything had fallen apart in a matter of moments. Claire's betrayal weighed heavily on him, but there was something else that gnawed at his mind, a part of the story that didn't quite add up. Why had Claire hidden such a significant part of her life? What was she trying to cover up? He needed answers. Ethan, too, sensed there was more to the story. He had uncovered enough to stop the wedding, but now that the dust had settled, he couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't gotten the full picture. Claire had stormed off, leaving more questions than answers, and he couldn't let it go. One afternoon, while sitting together in their quiet home, Ethan broke the silence. Dad, we need to figure out the rest. Something's not right. Claire's secret. It's bigger than what we know. Marcus, who had been staring blankly at the TV without really watching, turned to look at his son. He knew Ethan was right, but where do we even begin? he asked, rubbing his tired eyes. She's gone. I don't even know if I want to dig deeper. Ethan was determined. We have to. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't just about the wedding. There's something more, something dangerous. Marcus let out a long sigh, then nodded. All right, let's do this, but we'll need help. Together, they decided to reach out to a close family friend, Detective Anderson, who had been a reliable ally in difficult times. Marcus knew that if anyone could get to the bottom of this, it would be Anderson. They called him that evening and explained the situation, laying out everything Ethan had discovered before the wedding. A few days later, Detective Anderson arrived at their home. He was a tall man in his 40s, with a stern but approachable demeanor. His years of experience in law enforcement had made him a sharp investigator, and he was known for solving even the most complex cases. You guys have quite the mystery on your hands, Anderson said as he sat down with them, a serious expression on his face. I've already run a quick background check on Claire based on what Ethan found, and it looks like she's been very careful about covering her tracks. Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. What did you find? Anderson pulled out a file and opened it on the table. Claire's past is more complicated than we thought. The woman you were going to marry, Marcus, has connections to some shady people, people who don't like being exposed. Marcus' heart sank as he listened. Shady people. What kind of people are we talking about? Anderson flipped through the pages of the file. She's been associated with a group involved in fraud and extortion. It seems like Claire was once part of their operations, but she managed to slip away without being caught. The problem is, someone in that group might be looking for her. Marcus felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. How could the woman he had fallen in love with be tied to something so dangerous? He couldn't reconcile the Claire he knew with the one Anderson was describing. What does this mean for us? Marcus asked, his voice tense. It means that Claire's past might not be as far behind her as she'd hoped. Anderson replied grimly. She's probably been running from these people for a while, and marrying you have given her a new identity, a new life. But now that the wedding's off, there's a chance they'll come after her. Or worse, they could come after you. Ethan and Marcus exchanged a look. The situation had escalated far beyond what either of them had imagined. Claire wasn't just a liar. She was in real danger, and by extension, so were they. Marcus stood up, pacing the room. We have to find her. If these people are dangerous, she could be in trouble. Anderson nodded. That's the next step. I'll start tracking her down, but I'll need you both to stay alert. If Claire reaches out to you, don't confront her. Just let me know immediately. Ethan's mind was racing. He had uncovered Claire's deception, but now they were caught in something much bigger than a broken engagement. This was about survival, Claire's, and possibly their own. As the night wore on, Marcus couldn't sleep. His thoughts were consumed by the woman he had loved, the woman who had hidden such a dark secret from him. He felt conflicted. Part of him wanted to forget about her and move on, but another part of him still cared for her, despite everything. Ethan, lying in bed, was also restless. He kept thinking about the revelations and the dangerous situation they were now in. If Claire's past was coming back to haunt her, what would that mean for their future? The next morning, Marcus and Ethan made a pact. They would find Claire, but they wouldn't let her betrayal destroy them. Together with Anderson's help, they would get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. The chase begins. The morning air was thick with tension as Marcus, Ethan, and Detective Anderson sat around the kitchen table. The information from Anderson had completely changed their perspective. This was no longer just about a wedding gone wrong. It was about survival, trust, and betrayal. They had to find Claire, not just for answers, but to protect themselves from the dark forces closing in. Anderson had been working through the night, digging deeper into Claire's connections. He had found something alarming, a lead on where Claire might be hiding. She's scared, Anderson said, his tone serious. She's running, and fast. I think I know where she's gone, but we need to move quickly. The people she's hiding from won't give her much time. Marcus felt conflicted. Part of him was angry at Claire for deceiving him, for putting him and Ethan in danger. But another part of him still cared for her. He had loved her once, and now that she was in danger, he couldn't ignore it. "Where do we start?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. Anderson unfolded a map and pointed to a small town a few hours away. "There's a safe house out there. It's known to be used by people on the run. I think Claire might be there, hiding until she figures out her next move." Ethan, sitting quietly beside his father, spoke up. "What if she doesn't want to be found? What if she's trying to keep us out of this?" Anderson shook his head. "It's too late for that. Whether she wanted to or not, you're already involved. If these people catch up to her, they won't care who gets in their way." Marcus sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. He had never imagined his life would take such a turn. One moment, he was preparing for a future with Claire, and now he was on the verge of chasing her down to save her, and possibly themselves, from a criminal underworld he hadn't even known existed. They agreed to head out immediately. Anderson had his car ready, and within the hour, they were on the road, the tension in the air thickening as they got closer to their destination. The town Anderson had mentioned was quiet, almost too quiet. It was the kind of place people want to disappear. As they pulled into the town's outskirts, Anderson stopped the car and looked at Marcus and Ethan. "This is it. The safe house should be just up ahead. We'll approach carefully. If Claire's here, we need to get her out fast." The house was small, isolated, and surrounded by trees. It looked abandoned at first glance, but Anderson had a gut feeling that it wasn't. "Stay close," he whispered as they moved toward the building. Ethan's heart raced. He had never been in a situation like this before, and the weight of it was pressing down on him. His dad walked ahead, determination in his every step. They had come too far to back down now. When they reached the door, Anderson knocked lightly, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. They waited, the silence stretching into what felt like hours. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the door creaked open slightly. Claire stood in the doorway, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She looked thinner, worn down, like she had been running for days. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice shaky, "you shouldn't be here." Marcus stepped forward, his emotions swirling between anger, confusion, and concern. "We came to help you, Claire. You need to tell us the truth." Claire's eyes darted to Anderson, then to Ethan, before finally settling on Marcus. "It's not safe for you." I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Anderson stepped in. "Claire, we know you're running from dangerous people. If we don't leave now, they'll find you. And us." Claire's face crumpled, and she stepped back to let them in. Inside, the house was bare, just a few essentials scattered around. It was clear she had been living on the edge, constantly looking over her shoulder. "I made a mistake," Claire admitted, sitting down on a worn-out chair. "Years ago, I got involved with the wrong people. I thought I could escape it all by starting a new life with Marcus, but they never stopped looking for me. When Ethan exposed my secret at the wedding, I knew I had to run. I couldn't put you in danger." Marcus stood there, absorbing her words. It felt like a punch to the gut, knowing that the woman he loved had been living a double life, hiding from a past that could have killed them all. But despite his hurt, he understood the fear in her eyes. She had been trying to protect them, even if it meant leaving everything behind. "We can't stay here," Anderson said firmly. "If I found you, they will too. We need to leave now." Claire nodded, her hands trembling. "But where can we go?" "They'll follow us." Anderson gave her a reassuring look. "I have a place. It's more secure than this. You'll be safe there for a while, but we need to act fast." As they prepared to leave the safe house, Ethan kept his distance, still trying to process everything. Claire had shattered his trust, but seeing the fear in her eyes made him realize that this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about survival. She had made mistakes, but she didn't deserve to die for them. With Anderson leading the way, they set off again, heading toward the unknown, where danger lurked at every corner. But one thing was clear: they were in this together now, for better or worse. The final confrontation. The safe house was left behind as they sped down the quiet road, tension building with every passing mile. Marcus, Ethan, Claire, and Detective Anderson knew that time was not on their side. The people hunting Claire were closing in fast. There was no longer any room for hesitation. Anderson had a plan, a remote location where they could lay low for a while. But he wasn't certain how long they'd have before the hunters caught up. As they drove deeper into the forest, a growing sense of unease settled over the group. The quiet woods and the isolation meant that if anything went wrong, they'd be completely on their own. Inside the car, the silence was thick. Claire sat nervously, her hands twisting in her lap, while Marcus drove with focused determination. Ethan sat in the back seat, watching his father's tense posture and Claire's anxious glances. He had never imagined their life would take such a dangerous turn. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the car. The tires screeched as Marcus fought to maintain control, veering off the road and into the trees. The car skidded to a halt, the group shaken but unharmed. Anderson immediately reached for his weapon, his instincts telling him they had just been ambushed. "They're here," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus cursed under his breath as he glanced around, trying to spot where the attack had come from. Ethan's heart pounded as he saw shadows moving between the trees. "Everyone out now," Anderson commanded. They scrambled out of the car, taking cover behind the thick trees. The forest, which had seemed peaceful moments ago, was now filled with tension. The sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush grew louder. Whoever was coming wasn't trying to be quiet. They wanted to be found. Marcus held Ethan close behind him, while Claire stayed low beside them, her eyes darting around for any sign of their attackers. Anderson took position, ready for the inevitable fight. Then, from the shadows, a group of armed men appeared, their faces hidden behind masks. They were clearly professionals, trained, and dangerous. Their leader stepped forward, his voice cold and menacing. "Claire," the leader called out, "you've run far enough. It's time to come with us." Claire stood up slowly, her body shaking. "Please, just leave them out of this. I'll go with you if you let them go." Marcus grabbed her arm. "No, Claire, we're not letting you sacrifice yourself." The leader laughed, shaking his head. "This isn't a negotiation. You know too much, and your little family here is now part of the problem." Anderson's voice cut through the tension. "You're not taking her anywhere." The standoff began. Anderson opened fire, and the forest erupted into chaos. Marcus pulled Claire and Ethan back, keeping them low to the ground as the bullets flew. The enemy was well armed, but Anderson wasn't backing down. Ethan's fear transformed into determination as he watched the scene unfold. His father was fighting to protect them, and Claire, despite everything, had only ever wanted to keep them safe. He knew what he had to do. While Anderson provided cover fire, Marcus spotted an opening. "Ethan, stay close," he shouted, pulling him toward a nearby path that led deeper into the forest. Claire followed close behind, knowing they had to escape before it was too late. As they ran, the sound of gunfire faded into the distance. Marcus knew Anderson was buying them time, but he also knew they couldn't run forever. They needed a plan, and fast. Claire stumbled, but Marcus caught her before she fell. "We can't keep running," she gasped. "They'll find us." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. "We need to fight back." Ethan, out of breath but determined, spoke up. "What if we set a trap? They think we're running scared, but we can turn this around." Marcus looked at his son, impressed by the idea. "A trap? It could work. They're overconfident. If we hit them where they least expect it, we might have a chance." Claire wiped the sweat from her brow, her fear turning into resolve. "I know this forest. There's a narrow path ahead that leads to a clearing. We can make our stand there." They quickly formulated a plan. Using the natural cover of the forest, they would lure the attackers into the clearing, where they could strike back. Marcus and Ethan gathered what they could to create makeshift defenses, while Claire prepared to lead their enemies right into the trap. Time was running out. The sound of footsteps and voices drew closer. Marcus's heart raced, but he remained focused. This was their last stand. Moments later, the armed men entered the clearing, expecting to capture a terrified family. But instead, they found themselves walking into an ambush. Marcus and Ethan unleashed their trap, catching the attackers off guard. Claire darted between the trees, drawing their fire away from Marcus and Ethan. The fight was intense, but the element of surprise gave them the upper hand. One by one, the attackers fell. Anderson, having fought his way through the forest, arrived just in time to finish off the remaining men. As the dust settled, the forest grew quiet once again. They had won, but the cost of the battle weighed heavily on them all. Claire stood beside Marcus, her eyes filled with both relief and sorrow. She had dragged them into this fight, but together they had survived. Ethan looked up at his father, his admiration for Marcus clear. "We did it, Dad." Marcus nodded, pulling his son into a hug. "Yeah, we did." Anderson approached, his face tired but satisfied. "You're safe now," he said, holstering his weapon. "But this isn't over. We still need to deal with the people behind this." Claire looked at Marcus, her expression serious. "I won't run anymore. I'm ready to face whatever comes next, with you." Marcus smiled, taking her hand. "We're in this together." As they stood in the quiet of the forest, the sun breaking through the trees, there was a sense of calm after the storm. They had faced the worst and come out stronger. Now they could start rebuilding their lives, together as a family. A new beginning. After the intense confrontation in the forest, the air was thick with silence. The echoes of gunfire had faded, leaving only the distant sounds of birds returning to their nests. Marcus, Claire, Ethan, and Detective Anderson stood amidst the fallen, a mix of adrenaline and relief washing over them. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to process everything that had just happened. The danger was not fully over, but for now, they were safe. He looked at Claire, who was scanning the area, her expression a blend of determination and exhaustion. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Anderson replied, cleaning his weapon and keeping an eye on the surroundings. "But we need to regroup and figure out our next move. The people behind this won't give up easily." Ethan, still catching his breath, looked up at Marcus. "Dad, what do we do now?" Marcus knelt down to his son's level. "We take it one step at a time, buddy. We'll report everything to the authorities and make sure you and Claire are safe. Then we'll figure out who's behind all of this." Claire stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I promise you, Ethan, we will face this together. No more running, okay?" Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of his parents' promises. He had never imagined that his life would involve so much danger, but now he understood the importance of standing up for those you care about. As they made their way back through the forest, the mood slowly shifted from one of tension to cautious optimism. They reached the edge of the trees, where a dirt road led back to the main highway. There they could see the flashing lights of several police cars approaching. "Help is here," Marcus said, a wave of relief washing over him. He gestured for Claire and Ethan to stay close as they stepped onto the road. Detective Anderson raised a hand to signal the officers. "Over here," he called, his voice firm and commanding. As the police vehicles came to a stop, officers poured out, ready for action. The leader, a burly man with a serious expression, approached Anderson first. "What happened here?" the officer demanded. Anderson quickly explained the situation, his tone urgent. "We had a group of armed men trying to take Claire. We managed to fend them off, but we need to know who sent them." The officer nodded, taking in the scene. He turned to Marcus and Claire, his gaze softer. "Are you both all right? Did they hurt you?" "No," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "We're fine, just shaken up. But we need to ensure the safety of my son." "Of course," the officer assured him. "We'll take care of everything from here. We need to get your statements and assess the situation." As they walked toward the police vehicles, Claire felt a sense of hope growing within her. This was a turning point, a chance for them to reclaim their lives. Later that evening, after providing their statements and answering countless questions, they finally found themselves sitting in a small police station. Ethan was coloring quietly at a table, while Marcus and Claire spoke with Anderson. "I've contacted the higher-ups," Anderson explained. "They'll launch a full investigation into this group. We need to find out who's behind this and why they were targeting Claire." Claire took a deep breath, her heart racing at the thought of what could happen next. "I just want to protect Ethan. I don't want him to go through this again." Marcus reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll do everything we can to keep him safe, but we also need to stay united. This family means everything to me." As they shared their hopes and fears, a new resolve began to form among them. They knew that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The investigation revealed shocking connections to a larger organization involved in illegal activities. With each piece of information, Claire's past became clearer, allowing her to reclaim her identity. As they rebuilt their lives, they forged new routines and memories. They found a small house on the outskirts of town, where they could live without constant fear. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to create a new family dynamic. Ethan adapted quickly to his new surroundings, making friends at school and engaging in after-school activities. Marcus and Claire watched with pride as he thrived, their hearts full of love and gratitude. One sunny Saturday morning, as they sat in their backyard, enjoying the simple breakfast together, Claire turned to Marcus. "I never thought I could feel this safe again. Thank you for standing by me." Marcus smiled warmly. "It's because of you that we made it this far. You showed incredible strength. We're a team, and we'll always face whatever comes our way." Ethan piped up, his voice bright and cheerful. "Yeah, and we're all superheroes." Claire and Marcus laughed, the sound lifting their spirits. In that moment, they knew they had come through the darkness together and emerged stronger than ever. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over their new home, they felt a deep sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to embrace it, united as a family, knowing they had each other's backs, no matter what challenges lay ahead. This part of the story wraps up the journey of Marcus, Claire, and Ethan, highlighting their growth, resilience, and newfound strength as a family. It reinforces the message that love and unity can overcome even the darkest moments, allowing for hope and a bright future.